but you are kind enough to publish the results of your performance, which show, despite those closures and businesses suffering, you see another trend in terms of the profit growth. Of course, the NPLs for banking somehow were hit because of the measures that were put in place. And thank you very much for cooperating with the central bank in terms of the scheduling, which is of course one of the problem, but I think it helps the businesses. But this is a response to what we think will help us. Certainly, but you are kind enough to publish the results of your performance, which show, despite those closures and businesses suffering, you see another trend in terms of the profit growth. Of course, the NPLs for banking somehow were hit because of the measures.
Introducing
Quite a number of them, and I think this is quite long, about 17 of them, near the groups that are benefiting from these mines. And expect to continue with that. We are going to continue with microcredit to the cycles. For example, there are a number of financial outlets in the microfinance support center and supporting quite a number of the cycles in the economy. That too will continue in the next financial year. We put in place in the heat of COVID, the businesses were affected, they are operating before COVID, but somehow their working capital or their capital was almost erased. These two, we work together with the banking sector and the central bank and design a system of 100 billion from government and 100 billion from the banking sector, altogether 200 billion. We are discussing why I think it's moving slower than we expected, but I think this will remain in our books for us to finance next financial year. In order to deal with those republic of enterprises which either near collapse or actually direct collapse, or they need some capital for them to reawaken their skills. The good thing in that category is that they cannot provide the they don't qualify for micro, but they qualify for small businesses, their kiosks, nursery schools, etc. So if we get them that incentive, then we should be able to awaken them back into the productive aspect of the economy. And that's the stimulus package that we think will help those micro and small enterprises to come up from the torture of the COVID pandemic. For the medium and large scale businesses, you saw from the budget speech that there's about 636 billion to support them. And you can cover all categories of these businesses so that we look at the entire spectrum of the business activity in the economy and see how best we respond to the challenges they faced during the COVID, and also how to awaken them back to the track of production and gain employment. The agriculture credit facility is doing wonders. In fact, when we started about 10 years ago, or thereabout, we started the capital base about 20 billion, and the commercial bank smashed it for 20 billion. I'm happy to inform you, as we stand today, that scheme has generated close to a capital base of 627 billion. It's no mean achievement over the period under which SCF was operating. I only like the participation of financial institutions to further enhance the participation along that, together with, of course, our small business stimulus package of 200 billion. So you see the capacity of about 800 billion in that segment is quite substantial for the size of our economy to awaken that area. The ministry has recently also negotiated, and I saw the headline in the vision, a grant. And it's the first time the World Bank has given us a grant that amount of money 217 billion. It's about 800 billion US shillings for women enterprises, because we know women certainly play a key role in this economy, and their businesses by far demonstrate a high degree of success, and we need to then tap into that. The women are there, the employments, and they are demonstrating agility and skill to generate income, and not that, pay attention to business success. And it's proven, they don't need media research, but researchers can confirm that. So, there's thought through in order to support women enterprises to awaken them or to get them out of the COVID pandemic and even bring more into the production realm is actually something that we are pursuing and are already successfully obtained a grant of about 800 million from the World Bank. That also will be available next financial year. We are further going to provide resources for a number of areas, and I'm about to come to the main anchor, which is the PDM, which is the full implementation of the parish development model as thought through in the NDP 3. And it's not at the time that we are about to review midterm review of the NDP, and we are starting this to see what we can do with respect to awakening the 39% of our household challenges in the money economy. So the full implementation of the parish development model with all the 7 pillars, almost all normally emphasize on one pillar, which is financial inclusion. Financial inclusion alone is 1 billion and 59 billion. What does government intend to do in this area is certainly to start a journey to improve the production and productivity of households, which hitherto have not been able to get the requisite inputs to increase the quantum of the output from their households in line with the zones that have been already identified of what does very well in which zone and what was missing in those households to awaken them so that they can buy inputs such as maybe fertilizers, they can buy inputs such as input seed for planting, they can buy inputs or such as implements which are more modern like a handhole, for example, walking tractors or whatever, under their enterprise identified circles and operational areas at the partnership. This is a very massive action to engage the whole country into the realm of production, first for their consumption, but most importantly for the market. And under the PDM, I say, under the 7 pillars of PDM, there are these pillars very relevant in this economy, which is agro-processing. Agro-processing is not part of the 1 trillion, no. Agro-processing and other associated pillars are going to bring additional money of about 1.7 trillion into the parish development activity. Those are the ones who will help in minimizing the service losses, which in some cases are certainly very high, towards 35 to 40%, which is certainly unacceptable. What they do, they come under the association as they procure the inputs for production, they increase the acreage output, and once there is mass output in the next few months, weather permitting, you'll see the blood of things like milk, beans, cattle, milk, etc. going on in the economy. That is even before we fully put the money that we're putting across for inputs in the economy, before we use the fertilizers, before we use aspects such as irrigation, mini irrigation schemes. So this increased output needs to be preserved, or the shelf life of the items need to be increased so that they live longer in order to have them access the market. The standards are equally improved in terms of post-harvest process and the technologies which are there for post-harvest process or harvesting produce in a very neat manner that does not make it prone to aflatoxins and other harmful ingredients. It's good for Ugandans equally to consume good quality items, and it's even more demanding for us to produce items for the market, first within the country, and also the region. It's very important then, therefore, for us to have thought through the entire process of integrating all the 7 pillars of the parish community into a parish. You see that whole of government operating a parish. This, we think, has been the missing link in our development agenda, and it's very transformative if we implement the way that we get through. And I think we've had the right of Speaker of Parliament announcing the whole of Parliament, because one starts from the top, preaching the gospel of the parish government, and they're going to be equipped with the essential elements and key messages that must be delivered to the parishes in order to galvanize support. The parish chief is going to be the central point of action and accountable officer at that level. Formation of circles is going to be central, and the Ministry of Trade and other organs of government are all going to be having a big activity. We have some money in this financial year to model, but we have decided then that let's prepare the parishes. Let's recruit the accounting officers, the parish chiefs, and that, I think, before the end of this month, will be accomplished in order 10,600 parishes in this country. Of course, that's direct employment, so those people who are going to employ this thing, we are going to increase. And there are only about 4,000 parish chiefs, so there's an addition of 5,000 people to the payroll on account of the parish development model. Yeah, the process, as I said, agro-industrialization is having about 1.5 trillion into the parish development model, and also the activities. So once the produce is handled better, the next step is the marketing, or perhaps adding value, and that's where then, through the rural electrification program, which was another arm, not part of the 1.5, not part of the 1.0 of the parish development, but it's a government initiative to take power to the rural growth areas. These growth areas then, this power then becomes the center of activity. They put there the grinding mills, like the associations. They put there the stores for their storage of the produce in acceptable standards. They then use that as a mechanism for marketing what we have in the particular parish into the next level to supply industry, to supply schools, to supply hospitals, to supply our security forces with all these produce. And then, of course, penetrate the regional markets first with respect to things like beans, offshore, beef and all products, chicken, and so on and so forth. This also helps us if we achieve, which we are going to, if I galvanize all of you, with the gospel. But it helps us to implement our policy of import substitution and export promotion. Import substitution of what? We are currently importing, of course, the wheat, which is now very rare, and the bread is very expensive, and on account of other supply distractions, and the war that all of us now know, and its effects on the largest producers of society. I was having breakfast and chatting with Dr. Musa. I told him, now, where is this? And I did it because, not because the president said, I like oil. I don't know putting oil on my cousin. If there is no customer, then I can eat my grandmas. I've grown also to a customer. I eat them, I eat them okay. I think I get oil cooking oil from that. I'm not comparing people, no. The people can also go for the hotels and so to speak. And then somebody asked me, but now you are taking away the Chicomano people. Chicomano is going to go up. What are you doing with these people? I said, maybe we should think of substitute products which are now imported. Like cooking oil, we have the eggs here. We have the chicken, we have the maize, we have the portion, why don't you make oil now instead of some of these things? And then you get it satisfied, you have energy, and you can avoid some of the communicable and non-communicable diseases, such as obesity and whatever. That's really like this. Only the eggs are eaten. We have them here. Or 500 uses of those eggs and eat. They may be cheaper in this one water. Only eat eggs. And then maybe for some time, as the price of the international stabilizes, we shall reach an equilibrium, and then you can go back to original disease. I'm just giving that as a confession of the import substitution, thinking that must go into us. Unfortunately, Dr. Musa, I cannot replace the fuel that was used in South. I'll come back to that shortly. Yeah. So, there is a policy of import substitution and export promotion. So, out of the parish development implementation, we shall generate that desired uniform outputs with the desired standards, the desired rating, to internally consume, have sufficient quantity for us, and then export. The biggest thing that keeps me awake at night is the right weather. If the good weather doesn't prevail, and we have in these amid crisis a shortage of food, it's going to be massive. I don't want to think about it, but it's keeping me alive. I don't want to wake up and say, oh God, let the day fall. And if this was in the morning, I ring the people and say, as if this was there also, they say, no, then I get no why. Because we went through the pandemic because partly, and inflation is not the level of inflation at the time, where I don't know that I always, because American man of course came down, but people were eating. Most of the people who were in town, after the villages, started producing them there. They wake up, eat whatever they produce and rest. So agriculture and agro-processing under the BDM is our survival, line of survival number one, and we must do whatever it takes for us to do that. And then, because the practice weather, then the next item then is how we secure water, because our biggest problem is drought. Floods are there when there's too much rain, but the biggest problem on our agricultural production, our sustained production throughout the year, is irrigation, mini irrigation schemes. Using the hot sun, capture it with solar panels, which are encouraged in academia to start training our young people about the solar technologies so that currently we're putting them, they are not accessible them. But I think if we start, now we have minerals which are standard to manufacture solar panels and batteries, it will be a very big evolution to add on to the agriculture productivity throughout the year so that our people can be able to sink the water pumps, use the power of the sun which is scorching to pump out this water, irrigate, and then get the output. When the rains come, of course, you can now use less of that. So that is the direction we should be taking, and the budget is also emphasizing that. I'm taking more time on PDF because this is what we think we should all galvanize ourselves to, and then move forward with respect to improving that. With respect to the rising prices, unfortunately, the biggest cause of these rising prices is externally induced shocks. First, as a result of the subdued demand globally during the pandemic, and then all of a sudden, when Uganda opened, Uganda's economy is one of the smallest economies in the world. Only $45 billion was estimated for, $46 billion estimated for this financial year. But there are bigger economies. The US in excess of $23 trillion, followed by China in excess of $20 trillion, according to the statistics, followed by combined is also in excess But a small economy in a world having that huge aggregate demand is a perspective that must be in our minds, that it will not be short-term solutions. You cannot demonstrate down tax the prices. In fact, actually, when you demonstrate against prices, you have to go to increase them. Because now the money is shared, coming, and again, you probably the trumpet of instability, which then makes investors shy, even touching the long stick. So, my view, those who are demonstrating against price increases, is that please, let's get people in production. That's where the answer lies. Prices. We are not going to be for COVID crisis, but the new period March, which is not as high as what it is, but to come down. But what happens is the external shock that we're dealing with is certainly external, and you cannot, as a small economy, influence the prices of fuel. You cannot. Because the areas which are producing fuel and pumping fuel are personal buying and customer. And then two, major producers are not producing. I mean, are not selling because of the embargoes and so on and so forth. Now, we have to struggle with the little that's in the world, and the rest of the world is open. Climate change hitting Europe, I mean, and North America. They need cooling systems which use this energy. So that doesn't more and more fuel. I think I saw the trend which from Bloomberg 101. So it was reaching 160. And Mr. Kabo will tell you what it is. Per barrel, up from 67, 80 per barrel when the economy is open. So all the economy is open almost at the same time. The production had gone down, the supply chains have been disrupted, and now what do? You have to be in the situation of shortages of the supply of these cooking things for cooking oil, things for manufacturing soap, the fuel itself, and so on and so forth. You don't have control over that. Therefore, what do you do as a small economy? As a small economy, we thought the best of prudent macroeconomic management that number one, you don't give new taxes. New taxes in 2 years. And the means have gone out like very well. And instead, what you do? You put some more money for URA to expand the IT systems. I mentioned a few of them, but I think I know Madam Patience will be able to mention some of them, or actions that I will do. And that alone is a source of money that we think we shall collect from URA from 20 to 23 trillion financial year, which is going to finance 59% of our budget, is going to come from those efficiency initiatives. Two, we are going to maintain market-based determination of prices. Don't depend too fashion-wise, but we think if you deal with aspects of food production domestically, and also surplus for the export and for the market, we think the index of inflation attributed to food volatility or shortages is going to slightly dampen the inflation tendencies now. Then we're going to deal with the interest rates and exchange rate that's induced by external factors. The Fed yesterday increased, as Absa and Mr. Mons, I think, mentioned, increased the interest rates by 0.75%. It's the first time they have done so since 1994 in order to deal with the inflation, which is terrible in the US. I'm not saying because terrible they are therefore must be careful. No. I'm saying I'm comparing the source of our troubles with our troubles and what we can do as a small economy by participating in international world trade and international activity. So what does it mean? The holders of US assets globally are likely to move their assets up to the US because the interest rates are not there. And they'll be able to deal with their inflation levels over there. What does it mean for a small economy like that? If those who have been participating offshore by bringing their dollar-denominated assets to our treasury bond and bill market, get it out. It means then that the exchange rate kicks in, pressure upwards kicks in, and that's what we have to watch. But we do not have to panic. We trust the central bank to be able to use monetary policy to manage that aspects. Don't come at the cost, but I think we shall be able to maintain that and be able to maintain our level of reserves to a decent level to help us deal with other prices. As the prices maybe go up and as negotiations internationally take place for pet members to start pumping more oil into the market, I hope they'll accept. But when I look at it, the barrel is 160, why we want to come down to 100 and not run from apologists. And that's why in the fiscal decisions that we're making, we're starting investments in our East African crude oil pipeline, and start also pumping some oil in the system. And hopefully, our little contribution and pumping from here will deal with the internal market, but also deal with the external market. I don't know how much time I have, but I'm about to finish. So, I think this morning I was watching Bloomberg last evening. I think the European Central Bank may also put up the interest rate to 0.25, and that's the Eurozone. So for the conversion rate of 1.3 US dollars to euro, you can now find the compound interest rate that translates. You may go to about a 0.5% point in euro as well. So what does it tell us? It tells us that when you go out to borrow to support URA in order to finance the budget next financial year, you have to watch out, borrow for positional terms. Because interest rates out there are going to be hostile to us. They are going to go up. And borrowing foreign currency is actually coming in with inherent risks of exchange rate when you come to take something in the future, which you want to minimize. So borrow concessional and also pay attention to commercial borrowing, which you must go there because interest rates internationally are coming from the negative to the very positive. And that's a very dangerous phenomenon for those of us who cannot raise enough money and want to borrow internationally to serve our case. It leaves you the option of do you now borrow domestically? Yeah, you can continue because the financial market here equally survives from some kind of borrowing or lending to government. But we should also minimize that because now growing at an exponential rate. We know how much we're doing in the servicing and how much we're doing in settlement of interest rates in the budget. Now in excess of about 2 trillion shillings. Then we are also going to use appropriate fiscal and monetary policies. I think I've gone through that in order to mitigate these adverse effects. It's a dicey way in which to do the things, but we have to do it. And hope that maybe 2 or 3 months down the road, I don't want to speculate, the new equilibrium, which is not as high as what it is now, will emerge from the domestic market and the world economy as a whole. Because we do not have the control over external factors in this economy. And I think that's what I want to message going through our industrial players in the financial markets, the industrial players, manufacturing, the industrial players in services industry. We are not helpless, but any attempt to try to deal with external shock domestically will be committing suicide in terms of economic management because most of you deplete their reserves and the prices continue. I know how to hold our position than how strikes. Now this time to be the strikes because you are not the affair that you are managing the economy. The current strikes are not necessary. That's what I still want to maintain. And if I have my way to advise those who are striking on prices, is that please, that they should be spent on going to give a cassava. And leave our youth in the centers to access it and do business. Leave our youth in the villages to get engaged in agriculture, produce more, and have food to eat. You can't get food by demonstrating. You can't get it doesn't make economic sense for you to demonstrate against prices when you calculate and you have a solution at your hand. And the government has given you a solution to do that. So it's a waste of everybody's time to demonstrate. But that's the price of democracy and freedom of speech. Now, the fifth thing that we're doing on the fiscal side, of course, I mentioned it, is maintaining peace, security, and stability. And I mean announced the amount of money there. We are going to continue enhancing investment in infrastructure to facilitate the processing of what we have under the PDM model and also other economic activities. And we shall be able to emphasize implementing the parish model, value addition, and access to markets domestically and regionally. That's where the source of jobs will come from. Because direct jobs in agriculture will come from. I know agriculture in advanced economies is a small part of the economy, but we need to start from there for those who have comparative advantage in agriculture and then grow as industrialized to higher levels of value addition in these agricultural products and then allow the farms to grow. But in our structure of the economy, it's better to start from where we're starting from, mass action on transforming the economy from grassroots. Direct employment comes in. As you add value to direct employment, as you innovate, you add more jobs. As you roll it out, jobs come on board. I told you we should invest in innovation, technology development, and transfer. This is why I talked about all these kind of technologies that are available for us to quickly transform what we're producing domestically, including minerals, into value-added products in order to earn higher market value on the value chain of this production. By starting with agriculture, we have entered into the oil industry. And the oil industry, when it comes on board, becomes a new source of the size of the economy. And I think according to the preliminary estimates, about $2 billion per annum. So, but before we reach there, let's have agriculture prepared so that we don't fall into what the economists call that disease. We have agriculture which is steady, fully integrated, right from grassroots to the markets. Then the oil economy kicks in just to add, and then use that oil money for infrastructure development, completing our SGRs and all those things that you want in terms of infrastructure development. Because oil revenues, as you know, the law commands us to use on infrastructure strictly, not recurring expenditure. It's in the law, Public Finance and Management Act. We are also going to encourage digitization, and I think you know the source of growth this year and some years to come is going to be in this digitization. And sustainable environment management is also going to take about over 1 trillion. And that includes aspects that I mentioned, harnessing alternative sources of energy, harnessing irrigation equipment, and so on and so forth. We are going to enhance, of course, we're not forgetting the social services, health and education, water and sanitation, and all aspects that are supposed to be there. With respect to private sector, I think we have put there 197 billion to help. We are just merely helping the private sector. Private sector know what they're supposed to do, but in that, we are obliged as a government to give assistance in terms of supporting policy actions, institutional arrangements that are necessary for them to organize themselves better and be able to perform their activities better in terms of the environment as well as the facilities that are necessary for them, which they cannot provide in their own business operations. The enhancement of public sector efficiency, I think, touches on the improvements in Uganda Revenue Authority, touches on the improvement of the rationalization of government ministries, ETCT, so that we don't have a bloated size of government in order to deal with our aspects of managing the economy. And finally, on the fiscal side, we are going to add certain aspects of processing minerals to value-added proportions. The aeromagnetical survey of the country has been completed by the, apart from Karamoja, I think I'll check whether the Minister of Energy has finished that. Apart from Karamoja, the rest of the country is now fully surveyed, and we now know what is available where.
And now the issue is putting that information into an investment proposal solicitation so that people who have the technology can come in and start adding value there. And you've had the president very emphatic, no export of raw materials or minerals, because it's a total loss to the economy, and we're doing a disservice to the people here. So, on account of that study and the findings of those studies, I think there are minerals of high value across this country, besides oil and gas, that now we need to put together as government in order to start soliciting interests to come and invest in those areas. So those are the key fiscal and monetary actions that we think this budget contains in order to deal with aspects of restoring economic activity to its pre-COVID levels, and also starting the journey for sustained economic growth in this economy. Of course, the downside risks are there. If, for example, URA fails to collect the money, what do we do? And we must finance some of these activities. Of course, the bad part is you cut the expenditures. But what does it mean in terms of what you are set out to achieve? Or do you come to the domestic market because the external market is very hostile? So all of us must galvanize ourselves as taxpayers to support at least the minimum that we are forecast URA to collect. That is the mitigating factor that we want to do there. Because I dread to see URA fail to collect the 23 trillion, which is 59% of the expenditures next financial year. The risk also, which is still hanging around ourselves, is certainly the continuous geopolitical issues in Eastern Europe and non-tariff barriers domestically within East Africa region, for example. We should eliminate that. You, the business people and the CEOs of business enterprises and trade people, I think let's put together ourselves now that out there is very hostile. Let's not introduce non-tariff barriers. We already said eliminate the barriers in the common market within East Africa. Now let's eliminate them. But why do you introduce non-tariff barriers? Eliminate those so that we can begin trading and getting the wealth within ourselves and make lives of our people quite easy. Some of the prices here are also negatively influenced by these non-tariff barriers. They are not necessary. They don't serve anybody's purpose. You are first of narrowing your market or constraining the market of your neighbor. I know you don't share incomes, but I think those attitudes should stop so that we get the full benefits of the common market and the integration process within East Africa. It helps a lot of businesses and survival of East Africans with respect to mitigating adverse effects of these crises. I said also that mitigate the crisis is really, let's get down to produce, especially food. Prices can increase, but let's have food to eat, but also excess for the market so that you can get money to now buy expensive liters of fuel. Then you drive 1 kilometer only and then see how far you can go. The other challenge is the depreciating shilling. As I told you, the increases in interest rates out there are going to attract capital away from our market into the other markets for them to deal with their inflation. And that puts pressure on us. We shall always be helping Bank of Uganda to be able to sustain at least the level of reserves, which are decent, 4.5 months, which is in excess of $4.6 billion continuously in the course of the financial year. And I think we shall achieve that. The foreign direct investments, on account of the investment in the oil and gas industry, are likely to show an upward trend because this is the right time now for even those oil companies and ourselves to invest in the oil here, because the availability of that machinery necessary for us to do that is the one which is the mitigating factor. But of course, generally, some of them will decline on account of moving money to the dollar or euro-denominated assets away from ourselves. So we need to watch that. There's a new thing which kicked in last week, but I think the security forces are going to deal with it. That is our next market to the west, that's DRC. We're monitoring those events also, and I think that our security and cooperating with the security of neighboring countries will be able to bring that one quickly down, so that our markets there will continue to earn us some foreign exchange to supplement whatever is going out on account of the interest rates going up the other side. I talked about the weather hazards, which is a constant threat, but I think we must start aspects that deal with solar-powered irrigation pumps and solar technologies, starting from even skilling our own people. It's good employment for them to adapt those technologies and be able to supply the technologies for our country. Of course, working with the Ministry of Water and Lands, because water and environment, because they're the only ones who know the hydrology, where these water sources, the aquifers are in the soil, so you don't sink everything down, or else you hit dry wells everywhere, and you find that you're wasting money. But necessary to work with the technologically competent Ministry of Water and Environment to see where to sink this water, or which river banks to sink the pumps, and then send money for irrigation. I have discussed those measures, the challenges, and possible mitigation measures to kickstart a dialogue on this very important thing. I think I should stop here and allow discussion. I thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Patrick. No disappointments on that. You've set the tone very well by literally not going back to the figures, but telling us what the figures mean, and telling us what are the risks out there, what are the intentions we need to do. So even if you don't mention the figure for Emyoga, but Emyoga is there for the subsistence who are outside agriculture. Because sometimes people want to hear those messages to say, if PDM is going for subsistence in agriculture, COVID told us there are also those who live on a daily basis, but outside agriculture. So the government is trying to respond to those. As I mentioned earlier, Fred Muhumza is my name. I come from Makerere University in its totality. So you'll find me at Makerere University Business School. You'll find me in the School of Economics. You are also going to find me in medical school for reasons that is economics. If you're not healthy, the economy is not healthy. So that's my constituency, but besides that, one of my childhood heroes was General Saleh, and at that point he was command of the mobile division. So if you find me anywhere else in other spaces, I will be in the mobile division. And that's again, that takes me to URA. It's not right to actually say URA fails to collect the revenue. You can flip the coin and say we have failed to pay the taxes. So let's share this responsibility. That every time URA doesn't pick it, we haven't paid it. Because sometimes we pass the blame. But it's more to us than them. And it affects us even more. So it's about partnership really. That we partner with URA, we partner with government, and government partners with us. And thank you for the partnership between NTV and Absa. Absa is my bank, but next to them is my other bank. I will not mention that, it's another day. This is not their day. But it's about partnerships, and one of the things that comes out in this budget is it's in program-based approach. We are trying to implement the National Development Plan. Somebody called me last night and said, I've not seen Minister of Health. Yes, this is a one government concept. Because where Minister of Health is, if there is no water and electricity, they cannot work. If there are no roads in that place, they cannot work. If that place happens to be next to the border of Bunagana, they cannot work. So security is also critical. So we're trying to conceptualize the one government concept, and that's one of the conversations we're going to be having here, that while we target the subsistence, DST, the subsistence can only sell to an aggregator. Who is taking care of that aggregator? I'm glad you're sitting next to Absa. You want to ask them, are you taking care of the aggregator? Because that is not on your radar. If Absa doesn't pick up that aggregator, your subsistence farmer will be dead on arrival. So these partnerships are going to continue as we're going to have these conversations. Borders cost about 5 million. So if you talk about 1,000 borders, that's already 5 billion shillings in the economy somewhere, outside the government. But what are these people asking for? A road. And it's not the UNRWA road, it is the community access road. So some of the questions we want to really interrogate with DST and the rest of us, how much money have we put in the budget for road maintenance? Because quite often the focus is on upgrading the roads, which is good politics. So we are going to take these conversations with the politicians to say, before you build the railway, that cargo on the railway began on a border, then on a pickup, and then on a fuso truck, then it goes on the train. So integrated transport is the language you find in this budget. And want to break down these issues for ourselves to be able to conceptualize them. When I get back later and the panel is coming on shortly, is to understand these dynamics. How do we continue in a market-driven economy? I've had people talking of capping prices. You cannot cap prices when you are a small economy in an open global world, because the rest of the world is running markets. I hear Kenya has capped. I don't mind Kenya capping, but if America doesn't cap, there is no way cap, because you're reducing the dollar, and the dollar people are using markets. And the concept that we shall come back to later is, what did liberalization and privatization mean? Minimum government, maximum governance. That's a terminology from another bank I will not mention because there is Absa's there. But it's a good terminology to carry forward. We actually perceived and decided to implement minimum government, maximum governance. But also beginning to see government try to come back where the private sector should be. That conversation will be led by UMA themselves. Let me invite, sometimes we have ugly faces, this is TV. So we want some beautiful faces and beautiful brains behind them. My co-MC, why don't you come and change the scene?
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred Muhumza. And now into the gist of the reason why we are all here. The thing is the 2022-2023 budget actually responsive to economic recovery and also growth? Now that's a very big question. Here to help us understand, we are going to be getting into a panel discussion. Our panel discussion is wealthy this morning, and I would like to invite our guests that are going to be deliberating these issues and breaking down the different sectors, the challenges and the way forward in terms of recovery and growth. I will start with Mr. Patrick Ochela. Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick, for what you have shared with us. And to say that government is only pointing us in the direction that we should be going. As the Deputy Secretary to the Treasury, you're most welcome. We are live on NTV Uganda, and you can stream on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook channel in case you have other businesses that you need to be conducting while following up on this dialogue. Next on our panel, we do have Mr. Richard Mubiru. Mr. Richard Mubiru is the Director, Economic Policy, Uganda Manufacturers Association. Now, the Uganda Manufacturers Association was founded in 1988. It prides of over 850 companies that are under its membership, and they are here to promote and protect the interests of manufacturers and industries in Uganda in the next financial year. Joining these two gentlemen this morning for this dialogue is going to be Miss Patience Tumusime. Miss Patience Tumusime is the Acting Commissioner for Legal Services and Board Service with the Uganda Revenue Authority. You're most welcome, Miss Patience Tumusime. Of course, you were about a week ago, was in the press launching a new software that is going to help them easily identify landlords dodging taxes. And we are waiting to see the success of that. That's a potential revenue source there. Joining the gentleman and the lady, we are going to be having Mr. Michael Seguaya, who's the Chief Finance Officer and Executive Director with Absa Bank. Absa Bank has been running African Nasty campaign and they have been identifying people who have been struggling through this economic crisis, and they are wanting to find a way together with them to get things done, and I believe they have achieved that mission so far. You're most welcome, Mr. Kudaya. And here to moderate this conversation is going to be Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Doctor, you're most welcome to the panel. The theme is the 2022-2023 national budget responsive to economic recovery and growth. NTV and Absa in partnership in regards to the post-budget breakfast dialogue that we are having.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite Mr. Kavoyo to join my panel for the first 1 hour because of the Fed. So I've given you a very specific assignment. You are the Fed representative in this house. Fed, by the way, is the past tense of feed, just in case you're not aware. Now, if you go to this paper, you will be sure that the only distribution on this chart that is in trillions is actually interest and external debt payment. That's the biggest allocation to the budget. So if you get any challenges of teachers still on strike and not being attended to, it's because interest and external debt payment has taken their share. But these are the challenges we want to have, and it's my quick shot out of the budget. Each of my panelists, beginning with Mr. Mubiru, and as I go to the other side, I'm going to just ask them in the first 3 minutes to give us what was their feel and their take on the budget to the theme. Did it respond to recovery and growth? So you have a blank check. If I fail to honor the blank checks, I'm the executive director of Absa. It was one of the best performing banks in a very difficult moment. How did you guys do it? I'm sending you all the blank checks. Mr. Mubiru.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think, to begin with, in manufacturing, it's a game for people that are not faint-hearted. We know that we are living in very difficult times, without a doubt, and we have seen a government remaining focused to the NDP3, which is basically the commitment that we have from government for purposes of directing investment for the next 5 years. Did this happen in what has been presented to Ugandans? I would say largely true. Government has done what it could do in the circumstances. I liked it with what actually the CEO for Absa said in his remarks. Leaders must be seen to lead. I think we don't live in circumstances where we can start throwing stones at each other because of what is happening. Because in the end, we will all be losers. I wanted to begin from that note. Now, in terms of specifics, the greatest that has happened is government recognizing very strongly the fact that sustainability, especially of Mother Nature for Uganda, is very critical. And I want to tell you that as manufacturers, this has been very evident. In areas where agricultural production is manifest, we register the greatest sales across the board. So when government gets worried with what would befall our mother country in the event that rain failed, it is very, very, very satisfying. And we saw that in actually the allocations
that were made. And much importantly, the commitment of the chief executive of this country when it reached the aspects of having to drive away people from the wetlands, because the irrigation we are speaking to can only happen when actually those wet areas remain wet. And I think that was very important. Secondly, I know I have 3 minutes. Secondly was the deliberate action by government not to move taxes upwards in the circumstances. I think this was great, and government deserves a round of applause, with your permission. Because many times we only look for what government has failed to do. Unfortunately, where we sit, we don't look at life that way. We think it was positive. We would think that that is the way to go. But the only thing, especially now that I'm seated next to my senior, was the aspect of introducing penalties. Penalties on account of governance when it comes to the business community for purposes of compliance. I'm in between Mr. Chairap and the collector, and I want to take this opportunity to tell them that you cannot enhance collection through penalties, because penalties can kill businesses, as a matter of fact, and that's why people are clapping. We will have a conversation beyond this that will speak to this, and we think that we can do 1 or 2 things beyond that. Lastly, since I have 3 minutes in the beginning, is the issue of governance. We have heard about the commitments that you have made for purposes of governance, but I want to invite you to look at governance in the broader perspective, and especially when we're transiting into the parish development model. This is not the first time government is putting resources for production. If you ask me to evaluate the Myoga, youth livelihood funds, and so on, private sector, we seem to get worried when we see that we are not so much yet recognized as key players. And we think that it's not too late. We can have a conversation that can bring us on board. But overall, I think government is on the right track. I thank you.
Thank you very much for the reflections from the manufacturing side of the private sector, and raising the issue of compliance. The right people are just beside you. Mrs. Patience Rubagumya is Commissioner in Legal Services in URA. So issues of compliance, when they become legal, you have the right partner right on your next side. She can give you those assurances. But in this morning session, she's also holding the portfolio of Commissioner General. So you also have everything that you need to keep the conversation going. She's acting Commissioner General, but her other is Commissioner Legal Services and Board Affairs. Patience, your 3 minutes begin now. You will have time to respond to many other things. What was the budget saying to you? Did they give you too much, too little?
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. This morning, first of all, to thank Absa and NTV for inviting URA to be part of this discussion. So just to start off, as the URA, yes, we do agree, and I think that this budget indeed was cognizant of the fact that we need to create an environment where businesses can recover. My boss, GST, has actually said and has heavily elaborated the fact that no new tax measures were introduced. Now you will be surprised, of course, as the URA, I would have loved to have more measures coming through, because then I would have an extra maybe 2 or 3 trillion to be able to collect just from the new measures. But you will be surprised that even as the URA, we are very glad that no new tax measures were introduced in this financial year. Because we are coming from the background, we saw how COVID did affect the businesses. We saw how businesses were indeed struggling. We had a number of taxpayers coming through and requesting to pay in installments. We had never had such a big number of taxpayers coming through asking, to be able to allow to stagger their payments. But we did recognize that indeed economic times had changed and they were struggling. So we did allow that. URA was also among the first that said, let's not introduce new tax measures, because we need to be able to create an environment where businesses can recover. So for me as the URA budget, when the minister read that part, we were very excited. But also in the domestic resource mobilization strategy and the DST, this, we have committed that we need to have a stable environment in the fiscal space. We are coming from a background where almost every financial year you have tax rates changing, you have a number of policy measures coming through, and the complaint that we have heard from our taxpayers is that we need to create stability. You cannot keep changing the tax regime almost every financial year. So I'm glad that we are working towards that commitment that was put in that strategy. So for me, this budget really just to say that indeed that we are on the right track and we are living the commitment that was included in that. One of the other measures also that came through was the fact that people who are supplying to government, we are now going to be considered under the cash basis accounting. That was against the background that, of course, the DST here, you'll bear me, that DST does not pay on time. And a number of times, the taxpayers struggled. They were struggling because they were on the accrual accounting method, where they would be penalized, and the interest sometimes was really stifling them. It is a call, it is a cry that came through and said, but can government recognize that? Why are you penalizing us when it is the same government really that has not paid? So that measure that came through, I believe, is one of the things that we've been able to recognize that indeed there is a problem here that we need to solve. So I think we are moving, government is moving towards that direction where we are listening. We are not simply interested in just collecting. And here at DSA, I can assure you, we are so ready to collect that 25 trillion for the next financial year. I say this confidently because the minister as well said we are going to focus on administrative efficiencies for the URA. So we are ready for that. We are ready for that challenge, and we shall not disappoint. So in doing that, what are we focusing on? We have said yes, there are no new measures. So what can we do internally as the URA to be able to collect the revenue? And here there are mainly two things. One is the digitization, but also listening a lot to our taxpayers. And this comes through from the different measures that we'll be having or initiatives. But it is very key and critical that even as we roll out into the financial year, that we need to listen to our taxpayers. And here we'll be able, of course, now to give more details if given a chance, Doctor. But those are the key critical elements that we cannot do this job alone. We need to listen to our taxpayers. We need to be able to understand their concerns to be able to serve them better. So these are some of the things that I will be highlighting more. But for us, I think as a budget, we are on the right track. And we believe that with these new measures coming through, we are giving space to our taxpayers. We should be able to see increased recoveries, but also in their performances. And this has been attested to the fact that since the reopening of the economy from March to May, we have actually registered their surpluses. But that is really leading the recognition that taxpayers are picking up, the business are picking up. So this budget on board coming, we should be able to see even improved performance. I thank you so much.
Quite an assurance that the revenues will come through. That other name, Rubagumia, if you just don't know what it means, it is to give you the comfort. It is living up to her name. But that means me and you have got to pay our taxes. It's our thing, really. But you can see how well we structured the panel here. We've heard from the budget, the private people, the adjustments. The budget is speaking to recovery because we're saying no new taxes, first recover. So it's really answering the question. But also cash basis, because whenever these guys would face URA taxes. DST hasn't paid, they would go to the bankers to borrow to pay taxes. So on the panel next is going to be the banker. The evolution is emerging. Eh? You don't want to go to the bank to borrow to pay taxes. That's not what we want to do. But just in case you're out there, we want to appreciate you who is with us, watching us. It used to be from the comfort of your sitting room. But now technology that Rwabini is talking about, digital, allows you to even watch us from the comfort of the beach, from the comfort of that coffee plantation. So wherever you are, please, we want to appreciate you being partners with us. But also for those in the room, there might be somebody out there who you lent money or who you borrowed money from. We are on TV. So please avoid these cameras. Eh? There is a door at the other side, there is a door at this side. Depending on which side you are on, the person might see where you are and come and wait for you from outside. Or might actually see that now that you are here, they can leave and walk freely if you've been looking for them to pay. So please, depending on where you are, the business of lending and borrowing is to the bankers. Mr. Segwan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think a lot has been said. From my side, very good news around no new taxes. I think for me, stamp duty and the changes that were made, where they nilled some of the stamp duties, to try and improve credit take-on was a very good idea. A number of programs have come through to try and boost aggregate demand. I mean, UDB, the parish development model, the women entrepreneurs, and so many other things. And I think for me the take there is, how do we ensure that these funds are used for production and not necessarily just consumption, to buy rice, posho, and beans, notwithstanding the cassava. The other bit is around agro-processing, and I do notice that about 1.5 trillion was put in there in terms of trying to improve the value chain. So clearly there's an effort for government to try and boost this economy. I also like the bit around security, 4 trillion. You know, the other day I was looking at the Heroes Day. I just wondered where was the president. I noticed that he was in Kapchora. The more focused theme was security in Kapchora, just to try and ensure that our maize comes out of there. So clearly there's a good focus in that regard. The ecosystem, there were improvements around the judiciary, the conferencing, the tribunals, so hopefully we should have decisions come through from there much better. So that's a good side of things. I also like the fact that the URA is going to go to Amazon and claim VAT. If I spend on Amazon, not to just look at me, who is paying payee and so much, let them also collect from these guys, Amazon, Netflix. I think those are good initiatives to take away the tax burden. I think there are areas that we need to think about. We've talked about, it's about 3 to 4 trillion increment. Remember, there are no taxes, but it's about 3 to 4 trillion increment that we have to pay in this dire situation. So there's food for thought. We've talked about penalties. I think it's for us to think through how we're going to manage in this environment. There was an increment in domestic financing. That ultimately means maybe crowding up private credit, but we'll see how to balance that because that's food for thought where we need to think through. There was the amendment of rent going to affect the property. And for me, I think it's just trying to understand how we're going to work through the property space. People working through credit, ensuring that they can account for their cost of doing business in this area. I think that's where the food for thought. There are areas of improvement that I felt that come through as well. I think a bit of that has been talked about, transport decision, the railway, Lake Victoria. I think we need to just make decisions and fast track some of these things. Security, I think a lot has been talked about. I was reading about the demonstrations yesterday in Goma. Clearly, as the leadership, as a country, we need to sit down with our neighbors and get the value of Congo being part of the East African community. And that's what I look forward to. And I think there's a lot more we can do in terms of setting up structures, trade support systems that can facilitate us exporting into the neighbors. I would want to see, I've had Cafe Javas going to Kenya. I want to hear our own going out there, not so much of coming in. So how do we open our minds to ensure that we facilitate that? And lastly, a lot has been talked about irrigation, facilitating that. I would have expected more, but recently as flying over Nuer district and Chigandongo, it actually felt like you're landing in South Africa. The kind of farms that we are seeing, they are very good, and there's quite some development that's happening there. I think we need to facilitate this agriculture to just manage the climate change that is coming with us. That's my input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for raising the security issues. Quite often people ask, why all this money in security? If security is really not there, you have trucks stuck on the other side of Bunagana, that business person is making a loss. Because some people made losses in South Sudan, you don't want that to happen in the DRC, which has just joined us. So those conversations are critical, and I think it is comforting to know that DST provided sufficient resources. We don't know whether they will be sufficient. War is one thing that you can never predict. If there is any certain thing about war, it is uncertainty. The truth dies first, and everything else rolls on. And while we were sleeping, the Americans did their thing. That's why I invited my brother Kaboyo to come and tell us, what does this mean? Because sometimes we're actually budgeting. We call it domestic financing. But from the evidence, about 15% of this is not actually domestic. It comes from out there. So when the Fed is doing that, some of the monies may not come in, or they might come in at a higher cost and do a surprise again on the children's interest and debt management. Mr. Kaboyo, what did the Americans do to us while we were sleeping? Now I know they are sleeping at this point, but...
Thank you very much, Fred. Allow me, before I go into that, to just start off on a lighter note. Two issues I realized. I attended the budget speech on Tuesday. One key thing I noted, this was the most peaceful budget speech event in history. There was no feedback, no noise from MPs, everybody was quiet. What does that tell us? Everybody is feeling the pinch. Second one, my friend DST did not host us for a drink after. Normally, there's a party, Uganda Breweries products, they are not there. So that tells you that there is some sort of buckling up, I would imagine. But Fred, just talk about what my thoughts around the budget, the speech. I would call it trading the middle ground. This is a budget with no extremes, really. Very neutral baseline budget, but realizing and recognizing the current limitations that we all have. Comes against the backdrop of serious, strong headwinds coming from the global market, the global economy, and which takes me into what you just asked. What did the Fed do last night when we were sleeping? It's the biggest one-time hike rate in 4 decades, 0.75%. Huge impact for emerging markets, huge impact for economies like ours. It comes in three dimensions. One, it narrows the interest rates. The interest differential between ourselves and the US or other developed markets narrows down, and it has implications because that causes reversal of capital flows. Because the safe haven appeal of the USD has increased, and therefore US yields, treasury yields have gone up. Most of the portfolio flows that were coming into our markets will find a way of going back. What is the implication of that? A weakening shilling. So we are in for a weak currency going forward, where I see our own currency valuations by end of Q1, looking at the supply, demand dynamics, looking at the strength of the dollar, looking at interest rate differential, looking at geopolitical risks, we put it at around 3,950 by end of Q1. That has implications it looks like a weak currency will of course drive inflation going forward, because imported inflation, we are net importer. But even add salt to that is the crude